Our second reading today is Acts chapter 20, beginning in verse 6. Listen for God's word that is for us in this day. But we sailed from Philippi after the festival of unleavened bread, and 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. On the first day of the week we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting, and seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. All right. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the 3rd story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." And he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Confession. Okay, I got my mic to work. That's a good start. Have you ever fallen asleep during a sermon? So raise your hand up quite high. All right, well, I have too. I feel like some of you are holding out on me. I remember one Sunday I was about 12 and my parents came to pick up my sister and I really early in the morning after a sleepover, and we went straight to church. Now, I'm guessing we'd gotten some sleep, but all I can say is that my eyes were open when we got there. And then we walked in and somehow things got worse. We ended up sitting in the very front row. Not the second row where I usually sit, where there's still somewhere to put your feet or to lean on or something between you and that scary pastor in a 3-piece suit. Oh, wait. The very first row where no one's sitting except for Ken, because he has to be close to the piano. Now, I'd like to tell you that he preached for a really long time and that's why I fell asleep, but I can't. All I know is when I was elbowed awake, there was drool on my shirt. It was bad. And while I definitely dodged the pastor on the way to the cookie table, I knew that it was okay. I knew that this was still the place where I was supposed to be, and I belonged, even when I fell asleep. In reading Acts 20, I bet some of you were thinking, all of that could have been avoided if Paul had much shorter sermons. Am I right? All right, so maybe Paul shouldn't have talked all through the night, yet I do think this passage offers us deeper issues to consider than just the length of the sermon. Our artwork today is actually more of word art, and it's by Sarah R., and it's entitled, "When They Fall." So hear her reflection and get a little context on this passage as well. Once upon a time, there was a pastor who preached so long that a young man fell asleep, then fell right out of the church and died. Sounds like a bad joke, right? It's not. Eutychus was a kid, a teenager. He was at church listening to Paul preach for hours on end when he fell asleep and tumbled out of the window. He landed in the street below and was found dead. It's a tragic story, but fortunately for Eutychus, Paul ran down to the street, kneeled over his broken body, and revived the young man, bringing him back to life and back into the fold of the church. Eutychus is a passive character in this story. However, his story is not unique, because Eutychus is certainly not the only young person or individual who has ever fallen out of the church since the time Jesus walked this earth. How many people are falling away from the church? And when they do, are we kneeling in the street with them when things get hard? Are we carrying them back into the house to feed them and celebrate their life? Are we acknowledging how hard religion can be? Are we changing our traditions so that people with different mental and physical needs can connect to God? When members get divorced, do we ignore it? Or do we kneel in the street and cry with them? When our young people come out, do we celebrate with them, or do we leave them sitting on the window still alone, hoping they'll find God without us? When young adults say they can make a bigger impact in this world working for a nonprofit rather than going to church, do we invite them to preach, or do we lull them to sleep, hoping they'll remain quiet? May the story of Eutychus, his valuable life, remind us that people do fall. And when they do, we as a church are called to either catch them or fall with them. People do fall. And when they do, we as a church are called to either catch them or fall with them. Now, it happened at a session meeting not too long ago, and it happened again at the leadership retreat last spring. And it wasn't the first time. A small group conversation turned away from the direct question and onto the topic of children, grandchildren, or others who no longer go to church. And one after another, stories were shared of those who aren't here or who aren't in any church. Because of these conversations, I know that many of you have someone you love deeply that has fallen out of the church, and it's difficult to know what to do. Recently, I found myself convicted and concerned as I read a section of the Agile Church. And here's what it said. It said the majority of American teenagers are not particularly rebellious in their religious identity. They view religion positively overall, but as a generally benign force for good, a nice thing. Dr. Kenda Dean of Princeton Seminary writes, the problem does not seem to be that the churches are teaching young people badly, but that we are doing an exceedingly good job of teaching youth what we really believe, namely that Christianity is not a big deal, that God required little, and the church is a helpful social institution filled with nice people focused primarily on folks like us. Those words have really stayed with me. And I think it applies to many more generations than just the youth today. With all of this on one side, we know that the culture has changed, and that's not our fault. Yet we see the effects. Sometimes they're far from us, and sometimes they're very close. And sometimes we realize that we may actually be far from what we thought we were working for. Now, there are lots of studies and lots of articles and lots of books about why youth don't go to church. But we just talked about how Paul preached so long that someone fell out and died, so I can't go into all of those right now. But it all comes down to the same question. What are we going to do about it? So in considering that, I have a short video I found. It's done by a pastor called Ryan Landino in a Presbyterian church in Illinois. And he does these 60-second sermons. And in this one, he entitled it, "The Definitive Guide to What Young People Need." It's actually 1 minute and 43 seconds, but don't hold that against him.
Hi, Pastor Ryan here. In a few hours, I'm going to get the chance to sit down with some young people and hear from them about what they need from the church. Now, of course, we already know what they need from the church. I read it in an article written by someone older. So let's start then by me telling you what they need before they tell me. Number one, the first thing they're going to ask for is food. You have to make a food offering before they can trust you enough to speak with you. I might need to go and get some of those individual ice cream cups. Number two. Okay, so the other thing you're going to need is to learn how young people communicate in their natural environment. They use these things called memes. And what you're supposed to do is share them. So it's good to bring one for everyone. Number three. You need to come off as really cool. Yo, 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 this is about to get lit. Jesus is wickety whack, so skirt, skirt to church. Skirt, wickety whack, skirt. I'm kind of nervous. What if they don't have anything to say? Okay, what do you need from the church?
Not that.
To be welcomed and loved.
Love, that's yeah.
it. To be welcomed no matter who we are or what we do.
To be accepted for us.
Closing thoughts.
Love.
Love.
That's it.
What's it?
Love.
Stay alive so that we can be the future of the church.
Maybe that's it. Love. I think that for today may be our answer. And it may sound too simple, but it's really not. Because love is active. Love is going out and finding and being with those who are falling or may be falling. It's living into Jesus' description of the Good Shepherd who leaves the 99 to rescue the one. It's being the loving father in the parable of the prodigal son. It's picking up the phone when someone comes to mind. It's listening without trying to fix one's faith or theology. It's not judging when someone wears something or does something you don't like or think is inappropriate. It's praying. It's praying for them and with them out loud. Even sitting in silence, maybe while tears fall, and letting them know that it is okay to cry, and you will stay with them. It's not staying with those easy questions like, how's the weather? Or how many days until school starts or ends? It's getting to the heart of the matter. And so this week, I'm going to ask you to do something different. Don't worry about writing a name on the wall in the gathering area. Instead, look or think of those that aren't here. Maybe one you've wondered where they are or how they are doing. It could be someone of any age, but someone who you notice isn't in the midst of this community of faith right now. Maybe they're not well enough to come to worship, or maybe they've been pulled into another Sunday morning routine, or maybe they even go to another church. That's okay. Think of one, at least, that the Spirit has brought to mind, one that you've asked, have you heard from? Does anyone know how they are? But I'm asking you this week to do something, not just to ask how they are, but to call them. right? If that's all that's comfortable for you. But if you can, go to coffee with them or even have beer. We're Presbyterian. We can do that. Now, please don't go with an agenda to get them to come back to church or go and preach at them. Just go with love and listen. Listen to how they are. Listen to their disappointments or frustrations. Listen to their barriers or their struggles. But somewhere in there, ask the hard question that gets to the heart of the matter. It's that question that is so easy to pass by or leave unsaid. Ask the question that takes courage to bring into the conversation, but the one that yet holds life. Ask them, how is it with your soul? Or where do you see Christ and the love of Christ in your life? And maybe could we pray together? Now you may be thinking that this is something that the deacons do or that I do, and we do, and we will. But it is for all of us. And you never know. I guarantee you there are those of you out here who will connect more with someone who isn't here, who needs to know that they are still remembered and connected to God's love. And they may hear that more from you calling than me. Eutychus fell. Paul and others ran to him, surrounded him, cared for him, and found that he still had life. There is life yet. Go and love as Christ loved. That's it.